Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasami. So it's August 18th, new moon, Uposatha. We had our Patimokkha recitation just before tea time, so 4 p.m., 4 to 5:30 p.m. And so there's everything's falling apart, and so we have rain, thunder, lightning, fires, fire planes zooming overhead, earthquakes, and then I was looking out just before this, and people are stretching and getting ready for more meditation, doing meditation stretches, and as we do our sworn duty and keep the precepts, then remember being in Anagarika and doing meditation stretches. There was a group of us doing meditation stretches in the bowl washing area before puja, and there was like 5 or 6 of us, and we were all doing different stretches all together, and Longpor walked in, he just burst out laughing. We were all just getting ready to meditate. So that's very good thing to be doing. So, thought the obvious theme with all these fires and earthquakes and the whole Dhamma hall is shaking, but then having gratitude for these earthquake strap things they installed in the framing. They made a point of doing that in this building, so it has some play, so it can actually shake around quite a bit, and it should be okay. So we'll see. This is a good test. Seeing our 2-ton Buddha shake back and forth behind us there. And this is impermanence, so the Buddha talked about this, and it's something which is natural and ordinary, and it's always in our face, it's always right there, but just have to look at it. So not only is the world falling apart with riots and pandemics, but the body is falling apart with aging and death. So all we have to do is look at the body, and this is Kayagata Nusati, this is mindfulness of the body. And the Buddha said this is the path to enlightenment. It's looking at the body with mindfulness, cultivating body mindfulness, and keeping the attention in. So why would seeing the body in the body, why would body contemplation, body mindfulness be the path to enlightenment? And the Buddha saying things like, one who fulfills body contemplation fulfills the Noble Eightfold Path. So what would make the Buddha say that, or why would that be such a profound path? Just looking into the body, looking into the truth of these sankharas, of what makes us as beings. And then the Buddha using various methods to try to get us to look at anicca, to get us to look at impermanence, saying if even the great world, the whole earth will be destroyed one day. It'll fall apart, it'll dissolve somehow, or maybe be burned up in the sun or something one day. So how much more so this body, which just lasts 100 years if we're fortunate. It's not, and it's still even 100 years, that's not ordinary. So we think of a contemplation or a reflection that every single one of us sitting here, and in 100 years' time, none of us will be here. Using that as a reflection. And, unless we believe that kind of the first person to be 1,000 has already been born. But somehow I have doubts about that. So that's just the way of things. What's born has to break up. What arises has to pass away. Remember when this building, the reception hall, was being built, and in 2013 we built the foundation, and then we ran out of money, and so it was just a foundation for a year. So I remember doing walking meditation in the foundation of this building, and we had the winter retreat, and there was just a foundation here, and thinking this is the future. This is the future of I'm looking into the future of this building. Eventually it'll just be a foundation. So at some point it will fall apart, or it'll slowly degenerate, deteriorate, however many 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, who knows how long this building will be here. So it's here for our use for the time being, but at some point somebody might excavate a Buddha and say, oh, Buddhism existed here. Wonder how it got here. Yeah. So it's just very, very fleeting, the time we have. So to use that as a reflection for going for the practice, just doing what we can to cultivate the sila samadhi panya, to cultivate the virtue, the mental training, the wisdom. So it's like everything new we get can take that on as a contemplation of impermanence. If we have new clothes, thinking that one day they're going to fall apart. If we have, I remember getting the new truck and then thinking, okay, one day our old truck lasted us 20 years. What'll this truck be like in 20 years? Everything we have connected with the monastery. Or like, I came here when I was 20 and now I just turned 40. And so that's just aging. My eyes aren't as good. I'm just as energetic actually, but my eyes aren't as good, and various ways of being, or not maybe don't take things quite as seriously, not as high strung, and just say like, okay, well, what'll be like in another 20 years after that, if I'm still around, what it'll be like. There's a interesting thing we have the opportunity to do in Thailand. So when we're at Wapananachat, there's in War Inn, in the local town, there's a police hospital. So whenever there's a death, they do autopsies sometimes, and they know the monks like to do body contemplation, so the doctor will let the monks know there's a fresh body came in. You can come and take a look at the autopsy. And so I only got to do one of these on my last trip to Thailand. I always kind of missed out on the autopsies before that. But we get the opportunity in Thailand to see an autopsy and do some real body contemplation on a real person who was alive and then they passed away. So one interesting reflection, and this comes from Ajahn Kalyano in Australia, Buddha Bodhiwana. He was leading the monks to one of these, they were going to go see an autopsy. And actually at this point, they had made an appointment. It's like, okay, tomorrow we're going to go see an autopsy. And Ajahn Kalyano said, the person we're going to see tomorrow is alive right now. So the person we're going to see tomorrow is alive right now. You don't know who it is, don't know where they are, but the person we're going to see in that, somebody is going to die today, and we don't know who it is, and we're going to see them tomorrow as a corpse in this police hospital. And I just thought, that's just a creepy, kind of chilling contemplation. But it also drives home the death contemplation. So it's really important to make it real like that. But we have to be careful with death contemplation. If it leads to a sense of being morose or depressed, then we should ease off and do more metta. It's the death contemplation is really meant for cooling the mind down, bringing the mind back into the present. So if we have issues with, say, planning a lot or proliferating a lot about the future, making a lot of plans, then we can use the death contemplation for bringing the mind back into the present. So with one of these tremors that we felt this evening, coming to sit in the hall, and there was another somewhat strong one, and feeling a little bit of fear coming up. And I even thought I heard a sound from the back of the hall, kind of like a, what's going on? So what is that? Is it fear of death? What happens if this hall just comes crashing down? So what is that when the fear comes up? And just thinking about that. It's kind of a good theme to think about, what happens when the mind has fear. Sometimes there's fear that's actually helpful. So a tree is falling, you run out of the way, you get out of the way. That fear saves your life. So that can be the kind of instinctual fear that can protect you, that self-preservation. But then there's the more irrational fears. There might be the fear of just meeting somebody else or having a unpleasant conversation. Why does that bring up fear? And rationally, it doesn't make much sense. So I'm afraid somebody's going to see me in a certain way. Why in the world would that bring up fear? But it does, and for so many people. And in the time of the Buddha, with the worldview of India at the time, people were afraid of bad karma, bad actions, causing them to be reborn in the lower realms. So that's the Buddha put so much emphasis on the teaching of stream entry. If freeing oneself from hell realms, the ghost realms, the animal realm, that it would be impossible to be reborn into one of those realms if one were to attain streametry. So that teaching would be very poignant for someone who is born with, grows up with a rebirth worldview. For us, it might not affect us as much till we really reshift our perceptions into a transmigratory worldview that the Buddha taught about. So as far as like Hinduism or Brahmanism, reincarnation is still a big part of that. So the Buddha lived in a time where reincarnation, rebirth was very much the worldview, although perhaps they didn't understand it in the same way that the Buddha ultimately understood it when he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And so we can use this like transmigration or rebirth worldview as a working hypothesis and as a tool for just investigation. Like what way are we still ghost-like? What way are we still animal-like? What way are we deva-like? Somebody asked Ajahn Chah, like, how do I know where I'm going to be reborn? He said, well, just look at yourself now. Just look at yourself now, and then you'll know where you're going to be reborn. So how animal-like are you? How ghost-like are you? How human-like are you? So the Buddha teaching about impermanence, and I think if we really consider it and look into it, it's kind of like everybody knows things are impermanent. That's a no-brainer. But almost nobody understands the implications of impermanence or the meaning of impermanence. So we take this on as a contemplation as well, and just can give rise to like a sense of ease, a sense of coolness, a sense of well-being, a sense of being able to patiently endure through the difficulties and the vicissitudes of life. The sense of, as we age, as we move toward death, which is everybody's ultimate destination. So as we move toward death, then that contemplation and realization of impermanence can give rise to a sense of ease and well-being and purpose, meaning. It's like with Karen Miller, about to pass away. She's on hospice. She's been suffering from lymphoma for many years now. A dear friend of ours, supporter of Pacific Hermitage and part of the Portland group. And as a Dhamma practitioner, she's taking it in stride, and got an email from Ajahn Kurdadamo just before the puja, and he said she's just having a very good death, a very peaceful death, and is too weak to say more than a couple words at this point, but is very ready, and as in her own words, to send the body back to nature. So that's what we want. That's Dhamma practice. Or thinking of the Ajahn Sumedho story of Luang Por Cha taking Ajahn Sumedho to go and pay respects to Luang Pu Khao when Luang Pu Khao was dying as a very senior, revered disciple of Ajahn Mun. And Ajahn Khao had some sort of severe illness. I don't know what it was, but was very emaciated and in a lot of pain. And they went to see him, and you see these pictures of Ajahn Khao just before he died, and like his jaw was all like incredibly sunken in, like very skeletal. And so Ajahn Sumedho relating this, like seeing and paying respects to Ajahn Khao, and just Ajahn Khao wasn't able to speak, but just looked at them, and his eyes were just incredibly bright, just like beaming, like you've never seen anything like that before, and just so incredibly inspiring just to look at his eyes. Hearing that kind of made me think of in the suttas, the Buddha says that there's a few times when the Buddha shines and radiates more than normal. One of those times is just before his full awakening. He shines and radiates more than normal. And another time is when he's about to attain parinibbana, then he shines and radiates more than normal. Hearing about Ajahn Khao, you think about that. So we practice for death, and this is something ordinary. Doesn't have to be something scary. And we can talk about it. It's okay. I think we're kind of brought up like watching movies. It's like death is like the ultimate tragedy. But then getting our mind around the fact that it's just ordinary. We don't want to end our lives quickly. We don't want to interfere, but just to know that that's where we're heading, and to be at peace with that. So ideally, when we think about death, we'll want to meditate. We'll want to do more sitting meditation. We'll want to do more walking meditation. Our mind will leap out to that. We'll give importance to that. Remember the story of Ajahn. It was actually in 2010. He went to Ladakh right after I had been in Ladakh with Luang Por Pasano invited me to go to Ladakh with him for a month in 2010. I was in Thailand, so I met him in India, and we traveled around in Ladakh, and it's northern India, a very remote area, Tibetan Buddhism. But it was an unusual year in terms of the weather. So right after that, Ajahn actually traveled to Ladakh with some people, and the weather got quite bad. And it's in the rain shadow of the Himalayas, so it's normally very dusty and dry, but very cold. But they had rain, which they really never have, and so they had these horrific mudslides of like very fine cement-like mud that was coming down these mountains when it rained, and it covered over a bunch of people. And then the sun came out and it hardened like concrete, and it's this huge, very, very big disaster for Ladakh. And so Ajahn was there at the time, but he was at a different, kind of a different area at Somariri, going to this lake. And but it was also raining and very bad weather, and they went to this village, and there was a river which was going to break its banks and overflow the village. So there's this village like in a valley or a canyon, and this river was going to overflow its banks and sweep people away. So Ajahn happened to be there, and people were starting to panic in the village, and Ajahn had the thought, well, I could die in this river. I could die today. And so, well, I'd like to die meditating. So just started meditating, and people were running around, getting in a panic, and people started to see him meditating, and then his close friends, supporters were meditating around him. And then the villagers just started meditating, and everybody just started meditating. And he said everybody just realized what was happening. It's like, okay, well, what would be the best way to die? It would be meditating. That's what we want to do. So they were meditating, and river was coming up, and the rain let up, and of course this usually happens with these stories. The river started going down, and everybody was okay. But that's a very real, very good death contemplation. Like, what would we actually do when actually faced with death? It's also a good way, there's a skillful means to learn how to see and identify the sense of self that we have, and that's something that's important to catch. Death contemplation can help us to catch that, because the Buddha teaches about anatta, not self, and so there's this idea, like there's this falsely posited sense of self somewhere in the mind. How are we doing that? It's very, very hard to see. But incidents where these kind of things come up, it's a really good way to try to see it. So like, say an incident where somebody says something to us and we think, why are they criticizing me? And then if we've practiced for a long time, we stop it. Oh wait, I can catch it. I can catch it in that moment. What was that me? What was that me? And then we forget about the person that criticized us, and we investigate, what was that me that just came up? Can I catch that? Where did that come from? How was that created? So it's like catching the sense of self. Or like you almost trip and fall over a cliff, and somebody pulls you back, and you think, I almost died. So then if you're a practitioner doing the contemplation, you would say, wait a minute, the I came up really, really clearly right there. So what is that I that came up right there? So using these contemplations to start to see these things more clearly. And even just aging is like this time-bound process, and the days and nights are just passing by one after another, and it's just something might happen to us today, and then tomorrow, the next day, it might have affected us a lot. It might have been really difficult, and then 2 days from now, 3 days from now, where is that experience? It's gone. We're on to the next thing. So that's aging. That's like the aging as it's happening. It's moving. We're moving through time. So thinking like this also can be helpful for developing goodwill, because when we think about death and aging, we can think, well, everybody's in the same boat. can have compassion for everybody, feel for everybody. If we believe the Buddha's teachings on karma, we can also have a lot of compassion for people who may have done wrong actions, because then they would be, at the time of death, they would not have a good death. They would not have a peaceful death if the memories of those bad actions were to come up at the time of death. We can rejoice, we can have mudita for people who have done good actions or kept the precepts or done some sort of act of generosity. Then at the time of death, if that is recalled, then they'll have a good death, a peaceful death. Remember Ajahn Jayasaro talking about going to see some lay supporters, a lay supporter who was about to pass away, and she was unconscious, but they say like you can hear, and she was in distress, maybe having a nightmare or something, and then Ajahn Jayasaro gave the advice that all of her friends should gather around and just talk to her about stories of how they had made merit in the past and gone and given offerings to the monks, and so they were telling her this story of, do you remember that time when we went to this really remote monastery and like we couldn't find it, we didn't know where it was, and then we found it, and then like we had all these offerings and it was so remote that it wasn't well supported, and the monks were so happy that we came and gave them offerings and supported them, and they were living so austere, and then she started smiling, even though she was seemingly unconscious, a smile, and then the heart rate lowered, and and she stopped being in a state of distress. So we can do that with ourselves if we're in a state of distress. Try to remember some time, like just it's takes some training to be able to do this, to remember like small things we may have done for somebody else. I remember one time just letting someone use a phone card to make a long distance call to South America, and letting one of the lay people, one of the winter retreat crew, use a phone card, and I remember her coming back a few days later like, that made me so incredibly happy that you just let me do that, and so that felt good. It was just a small thing, but it's kind of like, it's like connection through generosity. It's like when we make an effort to be generous, not because we want to get anything in return, but just out of wanting to see others happy, just out of the kindness of our hearts, then there's connection. We make a connection there. It's a very strong connection. There's a sutta about that as well, where there was a lay woman one time who wanted to make a big offering to the Sangha, and she was starting to prepare the food the night before, and the Buddha got word of this, and he gave a Dhamma talk to the monks about it, and he said, "Monks, I want you all to bear witness that there's a lay woman right now preparing food for the Sangha, and she's going to fulfill the twofold purification of generosity." And what is the twofold purification of generosity? It's the purity of the intention of the donor and the purity of the recipient. So the purity of the donor is like she's really joyful while preparing this food. She's going to be up all night preparing this food, and she's incredibly joyful, incredibly excited to get to offer food to the Buddha and the Sangha. So that's the purity of the donor. She's enjoying the generosity, or like giving rise to immense joy while performing that act of generosity, and then the recipient, of course, being the Sangha, the Buddha and the Sangha, so the pure, those who are following the path of purity, and of course the Buddha himself being absolutely pure. And I thought it was interesting that the Buddha decided to give a Dhamma talk about that. Remember also something similar that reminds me of this. She's kind of elderly. I don't know if she's still alive now, but when Luang Pasano was at the cave monastery in Thailand, at Yom Nong's cave, and somebody found out, this lady found out he was going to be there, and she wanted to offer the meal the next day. And she was so excited that Luang Pasano was there that she was started in a similar fashion, started preparing food and things, and she was telling her friends, she's like, Ajahn Pasano's here, Ajahn Pasano's here. We have to make the food, and she got so excited that she had a stroke, actually, and Luang Pasano was laughing, telling us about this, but I mean, I guess it's not funny, but incredibly wholesome. I mean, to be excited about something like that, about generosity. I've seen people get excited about ordaining, about the prospect of ordaining. Just think that's how incredibly amazing to be excited about something like that, about something so wholesome. So when we practice, even if it's difficult, we say, enjoy it. Even if it's difficult, even if we're in the midst of stress and suffering and difficulties, enjoy the process, be amazed have a sense of wonder at what's actually happening when we train the mind. And Luang Por Cha would say, like, he'd be like, oh, I really suffered in my practice. I suffered so much, but, I really loved it, actually, even while I was suffering. The sense of you're moving in the right direction. He said it was like there's a certain type of allowable, like herb or these leaves that you can eat in Thailand, and they're incredibly spicy. And he said it's like these spicy leaves. You're eating them and you're crying and your nose is running but they're so good you just can't stop eating them. He said the practice, when you really practice, the practice is just like that. So it might be stress, it might be suffering, but you just can't stop. It's just too good what it's creating. The goodness it's creating is just, it's so worth it that you just keep going. So with death contemplation, we can come back into the present, have that sense of if it gets too heavy or morose, we don't want it to become that, so we temper it with metta meditation, with the goodwill for oneself and for others. And also using the death contemplation to develop a sense of goodwill, develop a sense of compassion, knowing everybody is in the same boat, everyone's brothers and sisters in birth, aging, sickness, and death, everybody in the world without exception, every being in the world without exception, brothers and sisters in birth, aging, and death, whatever religion, and it doesn't matter, your brothers and sisters staying at the Muslim guest house with Ajahn in Bodh Gaya, and they're like, yeah, we're family. To them, we were family, and they would do big meal offering on the last day of our meditation session at Bodh Gaya. So were serving us like something out of the suttas, serving us with their hands with the choicest kind of food they've prepared for us, and joyfully kind of serving us. And I don't care that they're Muslim. These are really good people. These are brothers and sisters. Christian, doesn't matter. It's everybody. People are just people. So, but that's kind of what drew me to the Dhamma, drew me to Buddhism, and in the beginning was that sense of just, it's a religion of nature. It's a training that has to do with looking into nature, looking into natural truths. Prabhupada translates Buddhism as the way of natural truth. I remember starting to understand the Thai language and listening to talks of Ajahn Chah in Thai, and there was a tape or a audio file I came across, which was Ajahn Chah during his first trip to the U.S. It's 1979, and he was at Ladawan's house in Seattle, outside of Seattle, in Bothell, I think, Washington, or something like that, some small town in Washington. And I suspected it was at her place, because I could hear the lay people talking with him and laughing, and then I checked with her, and she said it was, I believe it was June 9th, 1979. And there's a layman he's Thai, but he's kind of been Americanized, so he's like scientific, skeptical, and but he's there, and he's like he's asking Ajahn Chah questions, and it's just so fun to listen to Ajahn Chah answer his questions. And he says, so like in a nutshell, like what is Buddhism? And then Ajahn Chah just says, it's truth. It's just the truth. And then the guy's like, no, like what's the essence of Buddhism? And then it's like, it's truth. It's just truth. And then the guy's like, no, that's not what I mean. And then Ajahn Chah's like, that is what you mean. like he's like kind of messing with him. But it's just cracking up, just listening to this. And the guy is just like at a loss for words. Ajahn Chah was so amazing. And you could hear the women laughing too. They were laughing at the guy in the background. And then he goes on to do like a guided meditation, teach them meditation. And you get the sense he was just very down to earth. So we've got this good opportunity, and I'll leave it there for this evening.